Greetings! This is Captain Henson, and today we'll be discussing the 16th and last episode of Season 1 of The Bad Batch, Kamino Lost. With me today is...
CJ Rawl, standing by.
Jedi Knight Luke here, and no pun intended, let's dive into this.
So, as always, a brief summary.
So Kamino Lost is the immediate follow-up to Return to Kamino, and Tapoka City still being fired upon, and the Bad Batch are trying to scurry out of there with their lives. And it's quite a difficult journey that they go on to get back to the Marauder, even though there isn't actually much of an overall story to this one.
So, like with the Bad Batch, let's begin our escape from this podcast series.
So, first talking point, literally the very beginning, as the Bad Batch are trying to escape from the ever-increasing ruins that is Tapoka City at this point.
Yes, this entire episode is just one long escape sequence, and honestly, I think they pulled it off really well. It's difficult to not only, for one, have an escape sequence, but have it be the entire episode. And I think they pulled it off really well. I think it was really suspenseful. Granted, we knew none of them were gonna die, even without the Season 2 announcement, but still, it's all about how they get out of the situation. And I think with how they set things up and how we saw it play out, I think they succeeded.
I think the most impressive thing here is that not only did the Bad Batch production crew take something which would be a plot point as part of the sequence of events in an episode and stretch it out so that it's episode length, they managed to make it engaging every second, which I imagine for most things where there's just one priority in an episode is quite difficult to do.
And especially for, like I said, an escape sequence, because you have to get the audience to buy not only the entire event, but also keep them engaged for that entire sequence. Because with something like this, it could become very easy for the audience to just get bored, wondering when they'll finally escape.
We've said from the get-go that The Bad Batch is first and foremost a character-driven series. So if the interactions between all of them here weren't engaging in any way, we'd have been falling asleep within the first 5 minutes.
And I mean, hey, we got Crosshair in here, so we get that dynamic thrown into the mix.
Yeah. So, shall we start talking about the first actual scene in the episode now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind is that as the Bad Batch at the very beginning are stuck within the Kamino cloning facility, there's a moment where Crosshair gets pinned down by debris and Omega and AZ have to lift that debris off of him, but they are stuck in an increasingly flooded room where they're cut off from the rest of the Bad Batch. And not only does that room eventually become fully flooded, but Tech is unable to bypass the security protocols for the doors, and Wrecker literally has to pry it open with his big knife.
Or, as a reference, I'll say his big, meaty claws. For those who get the reference, round of applause.
Yep.
I see. Basically, what makes this first sequence engaging, apart from the suspense, is the humour. Because AZ basically says to Crosshair in this moment, "Hello, CT-9904. You have just woken up, but are mere moments away from drowning and are trapped by debris." And Crosshair just goes, "Get this thing off of me!"
Yes.
even though this is literally a life or death situation that these characters are in at the moment, AZ can't help but state the facts in a way that, even though they lighten the mood, aren't the most tonally appropriate things to say.
It's important in a situation like this that's heavy. When you want moments of levity, you can't have said moments take away from the seriousness of the situation. And that's something I think this episode did pull off. That even though we did have these more humorous moments, it didn't take away from the fact that, oh, these characters can die at literally any moment in the episode.
Yep.
So they succeed in getting Omega, AZ, and Crosshair back with them, and they walk on forward, but there are actually a couple of points in the episode where Crosshair hangs back and Omega has to turn and look at him, and eventually Crosshair gets the motivation to move on.
Yeah, the thing with Crosshair throughout this episode is he is given multiple opportunities to not go with them, but obviously to survive, he has to.
And unfortunately, he doesn't feel a shred of gratitude towards them for allowing him to go with them, because they could have ditched him at any time. And I know that there's a point where Hunter says, if you want to stay here and die, that's your call. But they don't outright say to him at any point, we're done with you, screw off.
I mean, of course, they would never actually say that, but the fact that they were willing to just let him do his own thing, I think is telling.
Well, after the flood sequence, they walk on forward through drenched hallways and they come across their old barracks.
Yes, hashtag one last ride.
And Wrecker actually makes note of the fact that the big mission tally actually survived the flooding.
Yeah, nice little character moment right there.
Yeah.
And Crosshair just has to be mood dampening and say, all those missions together, and you threw it away. Like, could he just show a shred of gratitude, for goodness sake?
I mean, it is certainly one of those things where, in his mind, his squad / brothers left him behind. So you can understand why he feels the way he feels.
Yeah, basically.
And this is where we get the first of, 2 or 3 discussions in this episode about allegiance and what it actually means.
Yep.
Because Hunter basically reminds Crosshair, hey, we made a choice, and being a good leader means protecting your squad. But again, Crosshair had to bring the negative remarks into play and say, look where that's gotten them.
Yes,
Yeah.
Hunter is very much an individual, and Crosshair is very much part of a group. In this case, whoever's the winning side. Crosshair is one of those characters who needs a greater purpose, and he puts that on to something, in this case, the Empire.
But the expense of the desire to be part of something is that you end up submitting yourself to it like a pawn.
That is what he's doing. Because the thing is, as we see throughout the episode, he does still love his brothers, or at least doesn't hate them. But because he wants to be a part of something, he just won't bring himself to admit that and go with them.
And of course, Hunter did try to get through to Crosshair and say to him, don't fool yourself. At the end of the day, all you'll be to the Empire is a number.
Yep.
But with Crosshair being Crosshair and being ever so stuck in his ways, he didn't listen to a word of it. And I believe the second discussion regarding allegiance happened as they were walking through what remained of that secret tunnel system.
Secret tunnel.
Secret tunnel.
There's another moment regarding the camaraderie that's been absent from the Bad Batch's circle for most of the season at this point, as they're walking through the tunnel system, and Wrecker says to Crosshair, all the time that they spent apart, Crosshair never made any effort whatsoever to try and give them another chance, at least not properly. And I think Wrecker then says, all that time, and we still would have taken you back. At which point, Tech actually steps in and says to Wrecker, let it go. Crosshair has always been unyielding. You cannot change that. He cannot change that. And Crosshair asks Tech, why are you defending me? And
Tech just says he's stating the facts.
Tech just says, I'm not. Understanding the subject does not mean I agree with you. Then we come to the monster attack.
A sea monster attacks the tunnel they are going through, and because it's not powered, the defenses are down. So AZ is able to get the defenses up, and bada bing, bada boom, they're safe for the time being. And after the monster attack, just got one more obstacle left to go through.
Which is making it to the surface. But at first they're not entirely sure how. I believe they go into Nalase's science lab.
Yeah.
And it's at this point, I'm pretty sure, that AZ ends up entering power reserve mode. That totally isn't building up to anything significant for this particular episode, am I right?
That's not a wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah, exactly. And Tech mentions that Omega knows this is where the Bad Batch were created, and Crosshair just says, how would she know? And we get a little bit of a bombshell here, don't we?
That we do.
That being, Omega is, technically speaking, older than the other Bad Batch members.
I mean, it's not even a technically. She is.
Also, we get a very parallel moment. Crosshair is sat down on a ledge to one of the walls, and Omega sits by his side, very much paralleling what happened in the prison in the first episode. And Omega tries to get through to Crosshair and actually empathizes with his dislike of Kamino. However, Crosshair, not only does he act negative to his brothers, he also acts like that to Omega. He outright tells her to go away. At which point, Omega realizes that Crosshair behaving the way he is right now, that is just the way he is. And that the inhibitor chip really didn't have anything to do with it.
Yep.
Next, they find medical tanks. And they decide to use these as their way of getting to the surface, which, just before they do so, AZ notes is a purpose they've never been used for before. But they ultimately take the risk and use them as their means of transport, so to speak. However,
and of course, AZ is used to make sure that they do reach the top and avoid any of the falling debris.
But Omega's tank gets hit by debris and it starts falling back down.
And of course, as we saw earlier, AZ was running out of power. We see his eyes flicker, and not the blinking he was doing the previous appearances, and he dies.
And as he dies, he is like, my objective is complete. But Omega, due to emotional attachment to AZ, doesn't take this well.
So, as the rest of the Bad Batch reach the top, Omega decides to open up her pod and swim down to the droid, which she couldn't possibly have the strength to swim back up to the surface with.
Coming from a swimmer when you're in very deep water, yeah, it takes a lot of body strength to try to swim up to a surface.
And not to mention having the added weight of a fucking droid. I can totally buy that she'd do that. It's just obviously we know she just can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
As that's happening, Crosshair raises
his rifle. Just for quick context, as Omega tries to holster AZ back up to the surface with her, she ends up drowning. And I don't know what it is, but the Bad Batch production crew are masters at depicting quick ones or fake outs. And this was absolutely a fake out, because didn't it look as if Crosshair was going to shoot Hunter?
Kinda did at first.
Yeah, you could definitely see that.
But he instead ends up firing a grappling line down into the water.
And
which
one
is
of
quite
my
impressive.
first thoughts when seeing that was, yeah, makes sense. It's one of those ideas where you saved my life, I saved yours, now we're even. Which he even says later on.
Call it a life debt, if you will. And also, if I may say, pretty impressive considering he was doing that at night and in dark water, which would be pretty pitch black down there.
Well, as Hunter said when the Bad Batch were first introduced to us in Clone Wars Season 7, when you have to hit a target from 10 clicks, Crosshair's your man.
Yeah, that's right.
So I guess it's no surprise that Crosshair managed to do that. So, Omega, and would it be fair to call it the corpse of AZ, given that he's currently out of juice?
I suppose that would be a fair word to use.
Yeah.
Are brought back to the surface. The whole team are reunited, and the Bad Batch, after goodness knows how many hours of paddling, finally make it back to the landing pad where the Marauder is.
And hey, one of the few times we see Kamino and it's not raining.
And also one of the few times that we see it during the day.
That too.
And we get a moment of the Bad Batch looking out on the, at this point, smouldering ruins of Topoka City, and whilst the scene didn't make me cry by any means, there's definitely something very emotional about it, especially with Omega's reaction, and how she's just processing it all.
Yeah, that was her home for almost all of her life. So it's kind of that moment where it's you pretty much see the place you've grown up for your entire life just kind of go up in smoke in this case.
Then we come to the final big interaction. Wrecker asking Crosshair if he wants to come with them, but he just turns around to them and says, "This doesn't change anything."
Yeah, the tried and true, despite everything we've been through, and despite it being proven that the side I'm on doesn't give two shits about me, I'm still gonna join them. And, life for a life, doesn't change anything, yada yada yada. I honestly thought Crosshair was gonna die, either self-sacrifice or otherwise, but didn't happen.
Something that I do want to just mention very quickly is the last exchange that Omega has with Crosshair on the landing platform. As it looks like she's about to board, just before she ultimately does, she looks back at Crosshair, and Crosshair just very rudely goes, "What?" And Omega, even after all the crap that she's put up with from Crosshair in the handful of times they've interacted with one another, is still incredibly kind to him and says, "You're still their brother, Crosshair. You're my brother too."
Yep, really gets you in the feels, doesn't it?
Yep.
As the Bad Batch leave, Crosshair looks back slightly, so we can tell that he has mixed feelings on what he's doing.
And then we have a very foreboding finale scene.
Yes, so we see a shuttle landing on Wayland, a planet we saw in a previous episode, and we see Nalase
being escorted by... It was 2 Republic commandos, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Clone Commandos.
So she's escorted out, and we see I want to say scientist. If I'm remembering Mando correctly, she's wearing the same uniform as the scientist guy from Mando. I'm spacing on his name.
Yes, he's wearing the same uniform as Dr. Pershing was wearing.
So yeah, we got a connection with Mando right there.
Yep.
And essentially, the Empire has use for her because, cloning.
And the episode ends there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And thus ends episode 16. Overall, I really love this episode. We got all the action in part 1, so I didn't mind at all not having that much here. The escape was great, suspenseful, character moments great as always, and it left us on a note wanting more.
This was a fantastic finale. I couldn't have asked for really anything more. Apart from Crosshair reuniting with the Bad Batch, but putting off the table, this was otherwise perfect for me.
Yeah, I would agree.
So, with that, overall thoughts on the season. When we first got word of this, I was excited, of course. You know, being a continuation of TCW and focusing on the clones, which was the best aspect of TCW, EU aside. As the season went on until the very end, this is probably one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars content, at least in regards to the new canon. It doesn't have the issues of TCW not being good with continuity in like any regard, and some of the arcs just being terrible. Rebels, I think, had the issue of just being really, really slow and not having that great of a cast. Resistance just fucking sucked. But this, the characters, they nailed the characters here. I was drawn in the entire time. I didn't think there was a single bad episode. And even when stuff kind of slowed down, these characters are just so fun to watch. It just doesn't matter what the plot of the episode is. You just want to see them. So, I cannot wait for Season 2. This is really great Star Wars content.
As for me, well, I didn't really know what to expect from this show, honestly. But when I first watched it, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty blown away from the first episode. And then from their fourth, I continued on watching. I just found every episode as good as the last. While there were some episodes that I wasn't as fond of, you know, like they were kind of my least favorites, they still were decent episodes due to character interaction and such, you know. And while it's up in the air for me with Season 2, I must say I'm looking forward to the second season of Bad Batch.
In my case, when this show was first announced, I was very much against wanting to watch it or be part of these videos. I didn't particularly care for the Bad Batch when TCW Season 7 was released, and I enjoyed those episodes, but they didn't strike me as interesting characters all that much. This show, on the other hand, has had me gripped every single episode. The cast of characters is incredibly dynamic and they bounce off each other really well. And somehow, the writing is now finally at a stage where even the most mundane of stories have been incredibly engaging to watch. I mean, we're talking about a show that had an episode dedicated to these guys capturing a rancor as an engaging story. I think that says something about the heart and soul that was put into this series. And let's hope that the next season can match and exceed it.
Yeah.
Of course.
Should we just very quickly talk about what our expectations are for the second season?
Yeah, I guess we can do that. As for Season 2, I would say Crosshair will continue to be their enemy for some time. Then he is finally going to rejoin them. Because with what they've done with him in this episode, I'd be shocked if that doesn't happen. Or, at the very least, there's a self-sacrifice. He's able to redeem himself in that regard. We're definitely going to see Boba Fett, and I'm betting it's going to be Season 2.
Yeah, honestly, I really don't know what expectations I got for Season 2. It's pretty much up in the air at the moment. So yeah, that's all I got.
My expectations for Season 2 would be probably Empire-bred clones. It wouldn't surprise me if we end up getting a Bad Batch versus Empire clone trooper type thing at some point. I think there's still going to be the rivalry, as Henson mentioned, between the Bad Batch and Crosshair. I guess we might get more cameos with maybe the likes of Wolf.
Well, given that we saw Gregor here, I'd be shocked if we didn't see Wolf next season.
Yeah.
Should we just quickly mention what the video format change?
So next season, instead of having several images, just stick to one image, probably just the logo, just to shave off on editing time, because let's face it, you as the audience, I'm sure, don't care about the visuals because you would have already seen the episode, so the visuals don't matter. And plus, they're just still images anyways.
Also, just coming from someone who has been the editor of these videos since day one, even though most of the videos have been really quite short, it's a pain in the backside at times to get these videos out with the amount of images from the episode that I've used for each one. So we'll be toning the images down going forward.
Yes. And with that, we come to the end of yet another Bad Batch podcast. With me today has been
CJ Rawl, signing off.
Jedi Knight Luke, signing off. See you guys sometime soon.
And of course, the always amazing Lord Captain Henson. See you all next time.